Monsieur Anber.
Monsieur Savannah.
How's it going today?
Lovely, excellent. I just made my cup of tea, so ready to go. And I'm hoping the guest we have on appreciates the fact that I'm having a cup of tea. Nobody else cares, but I think she'll understand why I'm having a cup of tea.
Yeah, we'll get right to it. To the fans of the Calling Russ Anber podcast, we're going to be talking, of course, about the fights that happened over the past weekend, incoming fights, including Demetrius Andrade and we fighting this Saturday. So there's a lot of interesting stuff. We even have to get to the Jake Paul Ben Askren fiasco, but we'll get to that on a separate podcast. We're lucky to be, and you briefly teased it, we have an invite and a guest today that I think many people will be excited to hear from because she is really emerging as one of the top fighters in all of women's boxing, and someone I think, Russ, you can appreciate because you mentioned the tea. Why are you talking about tea? I think there's a connection to the country where she's from and where she defeated Maria Lindbergh over the past weekend by knockout, her 6th consecutive knockout victory. So maybe we can get, Savannah Marshall on the program, we thought. Huh, Russ?
Absolutely. And I'm really glad to have her as well. And I think somebody who's really taking over the reins of professional boxing and in her conduct. And it's people like this that's going to grow the sport. And somebody who's come up, I think we'll let her explain, but I think someone who's come up the way we're used to seeing fighters come up, through the ranks and through the amateur program and, paying your dues along the way and then turning pro. So here she is.
There she is, Savannah Marshall.
Yeah. What a great introduction there. I'm a bit overwhelmed, but like I said, thank you very much for having me. I'm over the moon. You asked me to be on the podcast.
Oh, thanks, Savannah. That's really nice of you. I appreciate that. Like I just started saying, you've come up in a way that is almost symbolic of the way we've been accustomed to fighters coming through the ranks, the amateur program. Briefly, how did it get started for you? How does a girl from the north of England get into boxing and is now world champion?
Well, I first started when I was about 11.
Wow.
Nobody in my family ever boxed. My dad never boxed. My brother, from what I know of, no boxing in the family whatsoever. But I was always dead sporty. I always loved football, netball, that type of thing. And the real reason why I started is because one of my neighbours used to box. It was my age. Used to box, and I always remember him running up the street with a little plastic trophy, saying, "Oh, look what I've just won at boxing! Look what I've just won!" And I remember thinking, "Oh, I want to win a trophy. I'm gonna go to boxing. I'm gonna win a trophy." So that really was the first. Well, the reason why I was interested, because I wanted a little plastic trophy. But like I said, that I never knew anything about it. I never watched boxing. The closest thing I'd done was I used to fight with my younger brother, 18-month difference, and we used to play a fight all the time. And that was the only insight into fighting I ever had.
So what did you just go to? Did you just go to that gym where that neighbor was from and started out? Were there other girls training at that time? I don't know. Like, I'm trying to do the math now, going back 11 years. Or to when you were 11 years old, I should say, and how many girls were boxing?
No, so I was quite lucky because there was a girl called Amanda Coulson who was a pioneer of amateur boxing at the time, and she was from my hometown. So when I was interested in it, then I started to notice she was always in the local paper. She boxed for England. She was one of the first recognisable amateurs, female amateurs in the country at the time. So I was quite lucky that she was from my hometown, and I could look up to her and think, oh, well, Amanda does this and Amanda boxes. So that helped me out a lot. But the gym I went to, there wasn't no girls there at all. So when I got a couple of my girlfriends. There was about 4 of us, I think, first went. And my amateur coach, the guy who, gym I went to, it was the only amateur coach I had. He would openly say now he didn't want me there. I remember going, and I was like, "Can I join?" And his response was, "Well, if you've just come to mess about, you can leave now." And I remember thinking, "Oh, they're quite serious in here." So, and it was also Hartlepool Headland Boys Club. It wasn't
Boys and Girls Club.
It wasn't boys. It was Boys Club.
Right.
So, like I said, I went along with my friends, and they only went once or twice, and then they didn't want to go anymore. So I just used to go on my own. But I used to go never missed a session. Just absolutely fell in love with the sport. Although it's an individual sport, it was the whole competition. I'm very competitive, and I loved how everything in the gym was a competition. Who could do the most press-ups? Who could hit the bag the most times? Who was the fastest? And I think that it was that I fell in love with, the competitive side.
Isn't it crazy also, Savannah, considering where you were from, like in the amateur days or when you started boxing, to how women boxing now seems to be on the ascent and the attention it's getting, and well deserved. But when you look at where you came from now to when did you start feeling that women boxing was becoming more of a platform where it's going to be shared with the men, whether it's the fights attention it's getting, whether you see more female fighters wanting to go into the gyms and box? Did you notice that at all in the last few years, how there's been a change from the first time you stepped into a boxing gym?
Oh, 100%. I always remember an incident when I was about 14, and we'd went to another local club to spar. And at the time, sparring, out of everything, sparring was probably my least favourite, because, like I said, I was just so competitive. I used to want to win every spar, and if I didn't, I'd just go home and just kick myself and be upset with myself that, you know, maybe I got caught a couple of times for shots. So out of everything, sparring was my least favourite. Like I said, we went to another club to spar, and when I'd walked in, the coach was an old man, and I remember him. He pointed at me, and I was only 14, and he went, "What's that?" and pointed at me, and I remember like pretending I couldn't hear. And I just kind of looked away, and my coach had said, "Oh, well, it's our female fighter." And he said, he kind of shouted across the gym. He was like, "There's no female, that we don't allow girls in here. She's not allowed to spar." And for me, like I said, sparring was my least favourite thing. So at the time, I remember thinking, "Oh, well, I didn't want to spar anyway." But I think anyone else in that position would have thought, "Oh my God, I don't belong here. I shouldn't be doing this." But like I said, I just thought, "Oh well, I didn't want to do it anyway." But that club now has had multiple national champions, female national champions.
Women.
Yeah, multiple national champions. So that just goes to show how far females have come in the sport.
What's the biggest evolution you've seen, like, since you started, which you said 14, which for me could be about 5 years ago for you. So I don't know how, I'm not quite sure what the timeline is, but what's the biggest evolutions you've seen in the sport right now since you've been involved, whether it's amateur or pro?
So that would have been about 16 years ago, it was. But for me, so around about that time, our national championships, I don't know what it was like in Canada, but I mean, at that age, I got a bye to the final,
right?
Because there was no other girls about. So, like I said, there'd be 2 or 3 in the whole country at a certain weight, whereas now you have regional championships where, you know, the Northeast select versus the Northwest. So you could have 4, 5, 6 fights to reach the final now, whereas 14 years ago, you'd get a straight final.
Right.
So you were lucky if there was 4 in your weight, and you'd have a semi-final, so you could get 2 fights. But
so there's no doubt that it's growing. The number of participants is growing.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, even now, I love going to the amateur shows. Like I said, I'm still dead close to my amateur coach from all them years ago. And whenever you go to an amateur show, there's always a female fight on. Whereas 14 years ago, 16 years ago, it was rare. It was a bit of a spectacle.
What about the pro scene? What evolutions have you seen now in the pro scene and your acceptance, I guess, in the pro scene?
To be honest, I was never interested in the pro game. I stayed amateur for all them years, and I only turned pro about 3.5 years ago. And the only time I was interested when it'd be the likes of the lads that I was on the GB program with, the likes of Tom Stalker, Callum Smith, and that's when I'd tune in to see how they were getting on. But before then, was never interested. I never watched it or anything like that. So I can't really see how much it has grown in the pros, although I know it has.
Yeah.
And especially with Matchroom. I mean, you can say when I first turned pro 3.5 years ago, Eddie only had Katie Taylor, whereas now I think he's got 6 or 7 females on the books, maybe more.
Right.
So, that's how I can see it as grown as in the pro game.
So the most important question. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, man.
Yeah, so Savannah and Russ, I don't know if you agree with this. What I noticed as well in the pro scene, and even with your fight, Savannah, this past weekend, is that not only are female fighters wanting to watch you and inspired by you, and now you're seeing the growth, but male fighters, male fans are wanting to watch the woman fight as well. We are interested in seeing a Savannah Marshall fight. We're interested in watching a Katie Taylor fight, where it doesn't matter, which gender you are. You're interested in watching the best fight, whether it's female or male. That's where I find there's been a difference in the last few years or so, where the women are being marketed more and that more eyeballs are tuning in for their fights.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, for me, one of the only good things to come out of COVID is the exposure female boxing's been given, because obviously there's a bit less money in the sport, and it is cheaper to put a female fight on. And also with people not being able to go out, I mean, men are sat on the couch with their girlfriends, the wives. They're not sat with a group of men that want to cheer on, other men. They've got the wives or the girlfriends sat next to them that are saying, that are interested because it's fellow females watching the sport. So I do think COVID has had a massive part to play in the exposure of female boxing.
And I don't think there's any doubt that the standard has gone up as well. Before it was, I got to see it from the very beginning and saw its evolution. So, at first it was almost like a sideshow. It was two girls are going to fight, and it was like, it was something that wasn't. It was almost a freak show. There's two girls that are going to fight, and now the standard has gone up to where there are fighters like you and Katie who have taken it to a level where the ultimate sexist compliment of, she fights like a man, is really something that, the sport has accepted, that's saying, wow, she's good. You know what I mean? Like, this is not just a girl fighting with no technique and no power and no skill, and now there's some talent there. That's what I've seen.
Yeah, you're right. I believe you're right. It was kind of after the 2016 Olympics, there was a massive surge in those top amateur girls all kind of turned over at the same time. And that definitely boosted the level of competition. Like you said, there was Katie, Tasha Jonas, myself, Chantal Cameron, a couple of other foreign girls. And yeah, it like you said, it definitely raised the ranks.
So how's been the reception since your fight, like this past Saturday? And have you been getting a lot of people who've been talking to you? Or have you noticed now more followers on social media? Are you starting to get more and more of that attention? And sometimes it's an adjustment for fighters as they start to get along and get more popularity, trying to deal with both. Now you have the competitive side in you, but like you mentioned previously, you weren't that interested in the pro scene. So how much of dealing with now all the attention and the fans have you been able to, to balance all of that in the last few weeks or so?
So I've learned, probably the hard way, that professional boxing, it's not just about the boxing. It's about your profile. It's about, nowadays, it's about how you manage your social media. I think that plays a massive part in like I said, your profile. And the bigger the profile, you could say that the better slots you get on telly. Like I said, it's sometimes not just about the boxing. It's kind of, all part of the business and promoting yourself and things like that. And I struggled a bit with it at the start because I'm quite a quiet person. I'm quite a private person. I'm not really big on social media anyway. So, like I said, I've learned that you have to be busy on social media. You have to be constantly posting, talking about training, what you're doing, what your plans are. And yes, especially after last Saturday, my profile just went through the roof, really.
Savannah, I want to touch on that a little bit, if you don't mind. We're seeing two extremes now. We're seeing the girls like yourself or Katie, for example, who's left your profile relatively low on social media and has let your performances do the talking, if you will, and you've built it up on a solid foundation. And then there's the other side of the people, and this applies to both genders. It's not just male or female, but the crazy social media profile of the Jake Pauls and the YouTubers and stuff emerging without a background. I think that lends to two extremes. But having been in the ring and based on something you said to me after the fight, where you said you expected your opponent to be tougher, and I said to you, well, you probably took her more seriously. And I think at the end of the day, the substance, you can't have all sizzle and no steak. You know, there has to be the substance that's going to carry you through, especially as opposition improves, especially as the women's program continues to grow, that despite what happens on social media, despite your profile, at the end of the day, it has to be about whether you can fight or not. Yeah,
you're right there. It does essentially boil down to, can you box or not?
Right.
Yeah. And I think if you've got that as your main fundamental, I think really you can't go wrong.
You can't go wrong, can you?
You can't go wrong.
You can't go wrong.
One thing about boxing, but we hear a lot about there's no power, there's no knockouts in women boxing. But yet, despite fighting 2-minute rounds and 10 rounds for championship fights instead of the 12 rounds in men and the 3 minutes, you still have 8 knockouts and your 10 victories. Where does the power come from? When did you know that maybe I have much more power than the average fighter I'm up against?
To be honest, I've got quite chunky legs, so I think it all comes from the legs and the ass. But no, I think from the age of 11, 12, I was always told that I had a bit of a punch. And I think working with Peter, in the way Peter's told me how to deliver that power properly, I think it's kind of worked hand in hand, the natural power and the correct technique.
Are you an advocate for women fighting 3-minute rounds?
To be honest, I train 3-minute rounds. I spar 2 minutes, but I train 3-minute rounds. Just because it's a bit more easier, obviously training in the pro gym and with the lads with the changing the clock all the time. But I think for me at the minute, I think 2-minute rounds is more appealing to the public eye. I mean, I think I'm a boxer, and sometimes you get, the men fighting 12 threes and nothing really happens until 5 rounds in. And to be honest, sometimes when it's 3-minute rounds, you kind of lose interest. Whereas the twos, it's a lot more high pace. It's a lot more, you could say explosive, but I think from a public eye point of view, I do think 2 minutes are more appealing, more exciting.
There's definitely some, there's some truth to that, right? We're going to have more action in 2 minutes. It goes by really quickly. But what about the length of the actual fighting more rounds? Do you think then in that case, you could have the 12-round championship bouts for 2 minutes, or do you like it as it is right now, 10 rounds of 2-minute action?
Yeah, definitely. I'd fight. Like I said, I train 3 minutes, so I don't mind doing 12 threes. If anything, I think it'll probably work more in my favour.
Yeah.
But like I said, just from a public perspective, I do think 2-minute rounds is a bit more exciting. But I think it just boils down to, look, you can either punch or you can't. And I think when you punch, that's when the knockouts come.
100%.
Well, you certainly have that. I'm surprised actually on your take on that, because during the time that we saw the transition from amateur boxing, where it went from in the men from 3 minute to 2 minute. All of a sudden, even when it went to 5-2s, all of a sudden people who had no business lasting with certain guys were now lasting because it was 2 minute rounds. So even as things got heated up, ding, the bell would ring, and then you get a full minute's rest again, and you're able to survive again for 2 minutes. And I'm wondering, I seem to have noticed that in certain fights, especially when Katie fights, that just when it appears that that last minute is coming, you know, and she's really got the opponent going, that suddenly ding, the bell rings, and now the opponent gets that full minute's rest again and is able to come out and survive again for another 2 minutes. So I'm surprised to hear you say that you think it makes it more exciting.
Sorry, can we just pause for 2 seconds?
Sure.
I'm just worried about my phone dying. Let me just get my charger. 2 seconds.
Of course.
It's good for Savannah to charge her phone here. This is what happens as well. Like, it makes sense, right? The popularity means that your phone is going to be used a lot more, going to be exchanging messages, got to be up and profiling with these iPhones, right? You know how it is. Russ, how many times do you charge your phone in a day?
I walk around with a 12-foot charger, so I'm able to plug it far away and be able to still sat and be connected instead of having the one little meter charger. So I appreciate that. But you understand what I'm saying, Matt, about the timing issue. You know,
we talked about it on the previous podcast, of course, previously to even Savannah's fight, that it would separate maybe some of the fighters who are more used to fighting 2 minutes but could not fight 3 minutes. In the case of a fighter like Savannah Marshall, she would be able to fight 3 minutes, but I don't disagree that entertainment-wise, a fight flies by when it's 2 minutes per round. Like, the action, of course, is going to be theoretically more action-packed. And something I want to look forward to asking Savannah here as she rejoins us in a few moments is that the Silent Assassin nickname, we gotta touch on that, right? Because I think we're kind of maybe seeing it with the power she has and her personality. Makes sense, but I'm interested in finding out who coined that term for her, for sure. I don't know if you agree with
absolutely.
that. There's also
Absolutely.
And there's some fights in the middleweight division to be possibly, you know, we have to discuss, of course, that what are the future plans for Savannah going into the next months, if you will, the next weeks, depending on all of that. I don't know, Russ, if you recall a time where there really seems to be women wanting to fight the best, and male fighters try to conveniently find a matchup that's not necessarily easy, but is easier. So Savannah, as you're getting back here with us with the phone charge, I don't know if you're able to hear a little bit. We were inquiring about the Silent Assassin nickname because it makes sense with the power, it makes sense with your personality, but when was that nickname coined, and is there a story behind it?
So that nickname first come about. Obviously, I was on Team GB for a number of years, from the ages of 17 to 26. So I did about 9 years, and I was on the squad with the likes of Tasha Jonas, Nicola Adams, Chantel Cameron, and part and parcel of, you know, the whole GB setup, where we used to have media days where all the journalists and that would come, and cameras, and have a full day of doing media before a major event. And I used to absolutely hate it. If anything, I used to sometimes I just didn't used to turn up because I couldn't think of nothing worse. And that's where it come from, the Silent Assassin, because when I did used to do interviews, it was all one word answers. So, how are you feeling? Do you feel good for this event? Yep. Oh, well, are you going for gold? Yep. So the name actually come from Natasha Jonas. That's she gave me the nickname all them years ago, and it's stuck.
It's fitting.
Yeah.
It's fitting. Now there's a lot of, I don't know if you get told this or not, but there's a lot of similarities between you and Katie. Do you know her? You crossed each other. You weren't on the team at the same time, were you?
Yeah. So I've known Katie for a number of years. We used to go to training camps in Ireland, and I went to a couple of major tournaments, and I always remember getting kind of on the international scene when I was about 17, and Katie was just winning everything. Europeans, Wales, you name it, Katie was getting gold, and then she'd get best boxer of the tournament. And she was just really nice. She always had time for me. you know, she'd always come over and say hello and ask how I was, and just a really, really nice, genuine person.
Yeah, she certainly is, and she reflects a lot of the good things in boxing as well. And like you, she's sometimes bothered by the camera as well. You know, whenever she's told me on occasion, you know, oh, she says, I hate to talk in front of the camera, so I get worried about that. But when it comes time for the bell to ring, she's all business.
Yeah, definitely, she's relentless, absolute relentless, and she's just getting better and better every fight. I think there's no stopping. I don't think anybody at lightweight or super lightweight comes close to Katie.
And
Matt?
now of the higher weight classes in the middleweight division, of course, Savannah Marshall, it's very difficult to find opponents that match up to your level. And one thing about women's boxing, it seems like the best want to fight the best, a little bit maybe more so than the men, and hopefully it stays that way. For you personally now, and you have a few minutes with you, thank you again for your time, Savannah, is that, are you looking at specific opponents, specific goals in mind? Or are you waiting to see what Eddie presents as possibilities and you're just willing to be active? Or is there a specific opponent you have in mind for the future?
So at the minute, at the middleweight division, there isn't that many girls out there at all, which is quite evident in obviously me opponents and things like that. So ideally for me, I'd like to go back up to super middleweight, where you've got Elin Kudos from Sweden and also Francine Cruz of America. And it just goes to show how I don't know how you would say it, but us three have already all boxed as amateurs. So we're all very familiar with each other. A lot of the top girls who turned over have already boxed. You look at the likes of Katie, she's already boxed Chantel Cameron and Natasha Jonas as amateurs. So like I said, I'd love to go back up to super middle and box either one of them. Very credible champions, hard hitting, big girls. So like I said, I'd love to box one of them, hopefully become a two-weight world champion. And by that, my stock goes up as well. And then obviously come back down to middle and then hopefully get a big fight with Claressa at the end of the year.
What do you think about Claressa calling out Eddie for the amount of money she wants him to give her to fight you?
Well, I think I think we spoke about this, but also the people have mentioned it to me, is that why aren't her team, giving a counter offer? Or it just goes to show there's no offers coming from anywhere else. It's coming from my team. Yeah. So she makes out that, she doesn't need me, when it's quite inevitable that she actually does. It's my team that are, making this fight happen. It's my team that will be putting the money up. So I think she needs to start being a bit nicer.
How long have you worked with Peter?
How long?
Yeah.
So I turned pro in 2017, and my pro debut was in the August in Las Vegas, and I actually teamed up with Peter before then. I was due to fly out to Las Vegas 2 weeks before my debut, and I was in a situation where I'd never actually trained with a pro coach, never even been in a pro gym. So a mutual friend had said, oh, well, look, it was Sam Jones who looks after Joe Joyce, Big Joe Joyce. Mm-hmm. So he actually rang me and said, oh, well, look, Joe Joyce is sparring Hughie Fury, and his dad, Peter, said you're more than welcome to come down, and he'll take you on the pads, show you little tricks of the pro trade, so to speak. You're more than welcome to come down. So that's how that relationship started. Previous to that, I never knew anything about Peter. All I knew was that he was Tyson's uncle. So done my whole pro debut camp under Peter. Went to America. Didn't really work out over there. I was there for 6 months. Ended up coming back and went straight to Peter and was like, oh, Peter, will you take me back? Will you train me? And he was like, oh, of course I will, Savannah. So really, I've had my whole pro career with Peter.
Well, please give him my best regards. We've crossed each other in the bubble and never had a chance to speak. We spoke a little bit on social media, so I've got the utmost respect for him. So please give him my regards for me.
I will. Thanks, Russ. He's a great man, great man, Pete. And I just think goodness knows what he thought when I first walked in the gym. Obviously, female boxing isn't what it is now, and he took me under his wing, and he's never treated me no different to Hughie. He's never, he's always looked out for me. And with Peter, he's never buttered anything up for me. He's always said it how it is. He never. I remember when I first walked in, I remember him saying, "Oh well, look, I think you should be looking for a pro world title round about 9 or 10 fights." And at the time, I remember thinking, well, there's girls having getting world title shots 5-6 fights in. I was thinking, oh, Peter, it'll be before then, and he was actually right. In my 9th fight, I got to fight Hannah Rangan for the world title. So he speaks sense.
Has it changed? Has your style changed? Like, is there a big difference in the way you fight? Because clearly there's a lot. I could see some of that Fury influence of how your size, obviously for a woman, and how you're really nimble around the waist, and your hands are very relaxed. You bring a very relaxed aura into the ring. Has that been something that's changed since you've been with him? Has your style changed since the amateur days?
100%, Russ. If you were to see an amateur fight of mine with a head guard on, you wouldn't think it was me. I was your typical international boxer, hands up around the temple, forward and backwards in straight lines, straight shots. I remember first couple of pad sessions I had with Peter, I remember him saying, "Oh, put your hands down." And I was like, what? He was like, "Put your hands down, get them around your waist." And at the time, I remember thinking, "Oh, Savannah, just do what he says. You've got no other option. He's putting the time into you. Just do what he says." And I remember shadowboxing in the mirror and thinking, God, I'm just going to get my head punched in here. If I don't have my hands up, it's not going to work. And there was even another time when he told me to go southpaw, and I'd the whole amateur career, I'd never ever been southpaw. It was just not natural for me. And he had me doing footwork drills in the mirror for hours on end. And I remember looking and thinking, God, you are crap. You are rubbish at this. And then, after a couple of months and hundreds of rounds sparring, things started to happen. Things started to, work for me, and having my hands down, my reactions were a bit more slicker. So he's definitely molded me into the fighter I am.
Nice.
And for those because Russ, Peter, obviously Savannah knows Peter, but we're talking about Peter Fury, who I've met as well in Montreal when Hughie Fury turned pro. Tyson was in town years ago, something Adam Harris had organized with the Irish Embassy. Very nice man, Peter Fury. Savannah, we have probably one last question here, and thank you again for your time, very generous. Many people, we briefly mentioned the Claressa Shields fight. For you, if you had one fight by the end of your career, or the odds of the fans watching this who want to see that fight happen, are you confident that it will get done at one point in time? Or if it does not happen, it's not something that you really will regret if it does? Or what would you say the odds of you having that fight against Claressa Shields in the pro ranks? You've had it in the amateurs, but in the pro ranks, where do you think that fight would stand? What are the odds it happens in the near future?
I think for me, I'm very realistic, and I know that, like I said previous, that there's not that many girls at the higher weight. The pool's quite shallow, so that is, and because of what Claressa has achieved as a pro and an amateur, that is the biggest fight out there for me. It is tenfold. Even if I was to move up to super middle and box either of the champions there, it'd never be as big as what it could be as the fight with me and Claressa. So I do believe that fight will happen this year because of how big the magnitude of it, because it could be such a big fight. And I believe her ego wouldn't let it not happen. I think, it seems to be everything I say, she or anyone says, she takes personal, and she takes time out of her life to personally reply back to everyone and or block people. So, and obviously I've got that one win over her. I'm her one loss. So I do believe it will happen, and she'd love to avenge that loss.
Sounds right.
That's not. Oh, listen, I'm hyped for it. I hope, of course, if your plans for super middleweight go according to plan and go back down to middleweight, it's just going to add to the massive fight. Claressa Shields has an MMA fight planned now for the summer. We'll see where that goes. Russ, any final thoughts? I mean, we're very happy to be able to talk to Savannah for this long, and our phone didn't die. We're fortunate.
Yeah, mine is more of a thought than a question, in that, the way the women's program has evolved has been because someone showed perseverance and decided they wanted to do something. And I want to make sure that somebody like Savannah, and Katie, of course, but we're here talking to Savannah, but you have a goal, and your goal is about you. Your goal is about what you do and doing it the best that you can do it. And not relying on others to get it done for you, not worrying about what others are doing. You forge your own path, and you forge your own greatness and your own destiny. So if there's anything I've learned in the 42 years I've been doing this, is that you do your thing, Savannah, and they will come to you. Set your path, do your thing, be your champion, defend your title with honor and dignity and class, the way you have conducted your life. And I say that not because I've known you that long, because of where you are now, and you didn't get to where you are now by doing it any other way. So that recipe is working. So don't stray from that, and keep doing what it is that you're doing, and don't look back, and just keep going forward. The others are in your rearview mirror.
Yeah, brilliant. I'll take that on board, Russ.
Okay, good.
Words of wisdom.
Yeah, that's a nice way of calling me old. I get that. That's okay. No problem.
All right, Savannah, and we really look forward to being able to talk to you in the future. But for now, rest up, and really wish you the best of luck for the rest of the year.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks for having me. I've really enjoyed it.
Savannah, thank you very much. We'll talk soon. Okay, sweetie?
Cheers. Thank you.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.